Natalie, before we kind of talk about the stories and how the two of you got to work together, tell us a little bit about your yoga teacher training. As you and I have been kind of working together a little bit, I've been hearing about it week to week, and 200 hours is a very long amount of time to dedicate yourself to yoga teacher training when it's not going to be your like day job. You still have other things that you have going on. Tell us about the process of getting trained as a yoga teacher.
Yeah, it was something that I think has been in the back of my mind for several years. Um, and it just has never come to fruition, right? And then this new studio, very close to my house had opened, and it's been open for about a year and a half, and they offered teacher training, and I was like, ooh, should I do it? And then I just said, let me just do this. I didn't put too much thought into it because I think I could have talked myself out of it because it's a lot of work and I have a full-time job. So, and we have this podcast that takes up a lot of time also. But I just did it. And the way that they structured this particular 200-hour training was completely different than usual trainings. They did it throughout a 4-month period, which is the only reason why I could do it, because they did it once a month for 4 months. Of course, there were other, like Wednesday night Zoom calls, and there were all kinds of other things, but it was something that I could adjust my schedule and do. And really, the 200 hours is a foundational course for folks that are either looking to be a yoga instructor, or maybe they just want to deepen their practice. They want to learn more about the postures. They want to learn more about breathing, how to breathe, why to breathe, meditation. Maybe they're interested in the spiritual aspect of what yoga provides. So that it's really a starting point. And I don't know what the percentage is, but you can certainly go off and be a yoga instructor with just this. And then you can also go and do deeper training. You can do a 500-hour course. You can take, different courses that maybe are more focused on what you're interested in: prenatal yoga, chair yoga for elderly. Like there's just so many. I probably don't even know all of the options, but I have found a real joy in standing in front of folks and guiding them through a practice. So I hope this teacher thing works out. I've had the opportunity to teach a couple, and right now I'll be teaching at the studio that provided the training here and there. And we'll just see how it goes. It's very new. Like I just graduated Sunday, so it's all very still exciting and all of that. And so, yeah, thanks for asking, because I could probably go on for 6 hours about it. It was just a lot of tears, a lot of stress, to get through it, because it's like, I'm older than most of the folks that were in the training. And so it just, sometimes I was like, I think this is taking me a really long time to understand, like, what's going on. And, but I'm glad that I had the time to let it seep in. I got to absorb it, and I got to figure out within all of these items that I can choose from, that the teaching aspect is the one thing that I really love. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
I love that. Well,
I
you've already
like
gotten a lot
bragging
of.
on Natalie because she skipped a huge thing about this training. She did mention that she's older than a lot of the other classmates, and I don't know if you want to just give the range of difference, but I don't care. That's up to you. But this is a full 3-day weekend of yoga, constant yoga. And she would come back to me and say, I did this whole full 3-day weekend and I was doing all the things, every single yoga pose that was presented, I was doing it. And then turn and look at the younger people in the group, and they were all in child's pose because they were worn out and she was still going strong. And that is just so huge. And I'm so proud of you for that.
Thank you. And I don't know that I would have really noticed that. And it's not noticing this in judgment. It's noticing it because we can't, with the way that our lifestyle is, with the way that we nourish our bodies at this point, we can't unnotice those kinds of things. So it would actually make me very sad to see a 22-year-old laying on her mat and she couldn't do anymore. She would nap during some of the sessions. I'm like, what is happening? And so, and I'm not saying I was the most physically fit person there, but I definitely outworked most of the folks. And I don't mean that in a like I'm so much better, because I'm not. It's just that I recognize this because of the way those folks eat and the difference between the way I eat and how much more energy and stamina I had compared. So yeah.
Wow.
I hope that doesn't sound like I'm being all braggy, because I'm not. But for the record, I will be 57 in about a month. And so I did feel like kind of a badass. Maybe a little G.I. Jane-ish. I don't know.
Well, I did the bragging for you so that you didn't have to sound all braggy. So, I mean, it is very incredible. And that was the point of this, is that you know how they were eating compared to how you eat. And I really think that is not to say that you don't have the stamina, that you don't work hard, but you're fueled in a much different way, and we're able to accomplish things that the others couldn't.
Yeah, people in our community say that all the time. Like, think about like somebody like Doug Reynolds, who is already so busy hosting conferences and running Low Carb USA, and he just came out with a book, like, to do all the things that people accomplish in this space. It really says a lot about the lifestyle. And speaking of conferences, Robyn, I reflect on this all the time, and you and I have talked about this on the show. We were both attending the same conference, but we could have been two ships crossing in the night and could have completely missed each other if not for a really chance encounter as you guys were eating lunch. It was the first kind of like warm day in Denver that weekend, and so everybody was outside, and you and I with your group of friends started a conversation. You shared some guacamole with me, and you know what, we got to talk then. We met again in Austin. I got to meet your husband Matt, who is one of my favorite people. Got to meet his mom Rose. I've gotten to meet your daughter. We stayed together in Las Vegas to see the amazing.
Let's clarify, we, the family, stayed together. You didn't stay with my daughter.
That's true. Let's point that out. I did not stay with your minor daughter. Thank you for clarifying. Yeah, just all these like wonderful things that have come from this friendship, and thinking I would not have gotten to know Natalie, and so many awesome experiences that we've got to share just because of that one chance meeting. And I know we've heard your story before, but if you don't mind briefly, if you can remind us, why are you the person that I mention the most on this podcast when I'm having a conversation with somebody and trying to explain why it matters to know if somebody's cholesterol is ultra high, if it's necessarily good or bad for somebody in this space who's eating this certain way. Can you tell us how all of that kind of originated?
Yes, absolutely. You can't talk about Matt unless you talk about me first. So that's why I get mentioned
Sure.
so often. I told him I was coming on your show. He said, "Are you going to spend the whole hour talking about me?" And I said, "Probably." So I just want to go ahead and get that ball rolling. But my story starts with, I spent years just having mental illness problems. So I was diagnosed with, you said all of this in the intro, but diagnosed first with postpartum depression. However, that depression had been there way longer, years before that. I just never admitted to it. Which then was diagnosed as depression, which then turned into bipolar disorder, OCD, high anxiety, those things. Completely aside from that, I was gaining a weight. Of course, I was heavily medicated. So a lot of these antipsychotics and antidepressants make you gain weight, but I was blissfully unaware because I was completely sedated for several years. But I had gone to the doctor just for a general checkup, and my cholesterol levels were high. So he wanted to put me on a statin, and I kind of had some knowledge about that. So I just asked them to change my diet, and I changed to, like you mentioned, NSNG, no sugars, no grain. It's Vinnie Tortorich's trademark and his thing. So I always like to give him his credit. And it did the thing. It reduced my cholesterol levels, and my doctor just said, "Yeah, keep going with it." About a year later, I was, heavily listening. I was so excited about this. I was listening to a lot of podcasts, and that's when I started hearing about Dr. Georgia Ede and how she uses low carb diets to help people with mental disorders and mental illnesses. And so I was like, hey, I've been doing this a year. I'm still sedated. I'm medicated. I just felt compelled to try to get off of these drugs. I just wanted to see if it was possible. I always had this idea in my head that I could go back if I needed to, but I wouldn't know if I didn't try. So I went off of all those medications with the assistance of a doctor. I always want to point that out. You do not want to try this alone. And I went off all the medications, and I've never been on them since. Now, the reason why you talk about me so often on the podcast, Casey, is because ironically, my cholesterol levels did all kinds of crazy things when I went super low carb and I got lean. So I do fit into the phenotype of a lean mass hyperresponder. And this is what puts me in a very tricky situation, which honestly, I didn't even ever think about until you brought it to my attention in our first one-on-one interview. But that was that I have to make a decision every single day. Do I treat my mental illness and my symptoms from my mental illness with this low carb diet, or do I add carbohydrate or even a statin to address my cholesterol levels? And so I have made this decision. It's my decision. I've made it by educating myself, and I do let my doctors know, but I've made the decision that it is more important to me to manage my mental health symptoms with my diet than it is to worry about that number. I'm hopeful that there will be science to back that decision. And I feel like we're moving in that direction, but the scientific process is a slow process. So I have to make this decision for myself. I've experimented with it. I've talked about the sweet potato experiment that I did with Dr. Trove often. I know what happens if I add the carbohydrate. What happens is within a few weeks, my depression symptoms come back. And they come back with a vengeance. So I know what happens if I add the carbohydrates back in. So I've chosen not to seek that route.